Welcome, everyone. I am so glad you're joining us for today's deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
If you are, anything like me, you absolutely love learning. You're insanely curious about how the world works, and you're always looking for that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
Right.
But at the same time, you want to avoid the sheer overwhelm of all the information out there.
Oh, the noise is deafening.
It really is. You just want the good stuff, the actual insights, without having to spend, 40 hours reading academic journals.
Exactly.
Well, you are in the right place. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Looking at the desk today,
hmm
we have an incredible stack of sources. I mean, we've got dense neurobiological research papers.
Very dense.
Yeah, specifically looking at studies on the basal ganglia and compulsion. Those are from PMC and Frontiers. We've got fascinating articles on behavioral psychology, and we're going to be pulling heavy insights on identity-based versus outcome-based habits, looking closely at concepts popularized by James Clear's Atomic Habits, alongside some really interesting productivity frameworks from Psychology Today and the Sustainability Directory.
It is quite the stack today. And honestly, reading through it all, it brought up a lot of empathy for anyone out there trying to make a change.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's important to acknowledge right up front that today's deep dive is custom tailored for your journey into self-improvement. Because let's face it, building new habits can be incredibly frustrating.
So frustrating.
We've all been there. You set a goal, you start strong, and then
A few weeks later, you're right back where you started.
right, wondering what went wrong. So our mission today is to explain exactly why we expect rapid, almost miraculous identity transformation when we start a new habit.
Wait,
And more importantly, why that specific expectation is the exact thing that sets us up for failure. We're going to map this out for you. Moving from the surface level psychology of short-term behavior change all the way down into the deep neurobiology of long-term identity formation.
which is fascinating.
It really is. We'll explore how unrealistic expectations completely sabotage our goals, and how understanding your brain's actual wiring can change everything.
To set the stage, I want you to imagine a highly relatable scenario.
Okay.
Have you ever decided, that's it, I'm getting in shape, and you go to the gym 7 days in a row?
We've all done it.
Right. You push yourself, you sweat, you wake up early, you eat the salads instead of the fries, and then on day 8, you look in the mirror, you see absolutely zero physical changes.
Nothing.
And you feel this overwhelming urge to just
Oh, yeah.
quit. You think, what is the point of all this suffering if nothing is happening?
Yeah.
Today, we are going to look inside the physical structures of the brain to explain why that exact feeling happens and how to fix it permanently.
It's a perfect example because it highlights the fundamental flaw in how most of us approach change. We focus entirely on the visible result. We want the mirror to reflect the effort immediately. And that brings us to the concept of the 3 layers of change, which several of our sources explore in incredible depth.
The onion analogy.
Yes.
This is such a great visual from the sources. I want you to imagine behavior change as an onion with 3 distinct layers.
Okay.
The outermost layer is layer 1, outcomes. This is what you get.
Right. The results.
Exactly. It's the tangible result, losing 20 pounds, writing a book, saving $10,000, winning a championship. It's the finish line. Then, if you peel that back, you reach layer 2, processes. This is what you do. It's your systems, your routines.
Like going to the gym.
Right. Implementing a daily gym schedule, or setting a rule to write 500 words every morning, or even just decluttering your workspace every evening to improve your workflow for the next day.
Yeah.
But then you get to the absolute core. Layer 3, identity. This is what you believe.
The deepest level.
It's your self-image, your worldview, the assumptions you make about yourself.
Yeah.
It's the difference between saying, I want to lose weight, and saying, I'm a healthy person.
Right.
Or, I want to write a book, versus, I am a writer.
What's fascinating here is the direction of the change. Most people start from the outside and try to work their way in.
They start with the outcome.
Exactly. They say, I want to lose 20 pounds. Then they figure out the process. Okay, I'll go to the gym and eat less. But they never actually address the core identity.
Wow, yeah.
Deep down, they still view themselves as someone who is out of shape or someone who struggles with food. By starting from the outside, you create a conditional relationship with your own behavior.
Conditional.
Yeah. You are essentially telling yourself, I'll be happy or I'll be successful only when I reach this specific external goal.
Wait, let me push back on that for a second.
Sure.
If outcome-based goals are so inherently flawed and fragile, Why does virtually every successful corporation, professional sports team, and high achievers use them?
That's a fair point.
Companies run entirely on key performance indicators, or KPIs. Athletes visualize the gold medal. How do we reconcile that massive societal success with the idea that we should only focus on identity?
That is a brilliant question. And it's a distinction the sources touch upon when separating individual neurobiology from organizational management.
Sure.
A corporation is not a human brain.
True.
A company uses KPIs to measure output, but what actually drives that output? It's the company culture. Culture is the corporate equivalent of identity.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. A company that only chases quarterly profits the outcome without building a culture of innovation or employee well-being, the identity often burns out or engages in unethical behavior to hit those numbers.
They crash.
Exactly. Furthermore, for an individual, relying on the gold medal or the target weight requires willpower, and willpower is a finite biological resource.
It runs out.
It fluctuates based on how well you slept, your stress levels, your hormonal balance, or even just whether a colleague brought donuts to the office.
Right, the donuts always win.
Always. If your entire habit relies on the motivation of reaching a distant outcome, what happens when that outcome is reached? Or worse, what happens when progress stalls and the outcome feels impossibly far away?
The motivation simply evaporates. The sources bring up the classic yo-yo dieter to illustrate this perfectly.
Yes.
This is someone who sets an outcome-based goal to lose 30 pounds. They use an enormous amount of willpower. They follow the process, they track every calorie, and they actually do it.
Right.
They lose the weight.
They hit the goal.
But you celebrate. And then, almost inevitably, they gain it all back within 6 months.
Yeah.
Why? Because they were always just a person on a diet. They never became a healthy person.
Exactly.
The moment the external pressure of the goal was removed because they hit the target, their underlying unchanged self-concept simply reasserted itself. Their core identity never shifted, so the behavior couldn't stick. They went right back to the habits of the person they subconsciously believed they still were.
It points to a structural flaw in outcome-based thinking. When you pursue habits for external outcomes alone, you're operating on what behavioral psychologists refer to as extrinsic motivation.
Extrinsic.
It's the weakest, least durable form of motivation. You are doing something because you feel you have to in order to get a prize, not because it is an expression of who you are. The behavior is a means to an end. Once the end is achieved, the means are discarded.
And we have to talk about how modern society throws gasoline on this fire.
Oh, without a doubt.
We are completely surrounded by hustle culture and digital highlight reels. Everywhere we look, we see the absolute pinnacle of someone else's achievement condensed into a 15-second video on our phones.
Yeah.
It glorifies speed and what many call toxic productivity. We're taught that faster is always universally better. There's this incredibly revealing example from the Psychology Today source about getting a pilot's license.
The pilot's license anecdote is a fantastic mirror for our current cultural mindset.
Hustle culture tells us that getting a private pilot's license in the legal minimum of 40 hours is somehow better, or a clear sign that you are more successful than someone who takes 100 hours of flight time to get their license.
Right.
It conflates speed with success. It turns learning into a race.
Right.
But when you really think about it, if you were a passenger stepping onto a small plane, wouldn't you rather fly with a pilot who took 100 hours to master the craft?
I know I would.
Exactly. The pilot who experienced different weather conditions, who spent more time practicing emergency landings, who really lived in the identity of a student pilot before taking the exam. Our internet culture is obsessed with optimization and doing things in the absolute shortest time frame possible, completely ignoring the depth of the learning.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this conflation of speed with success creates the illusion of what we might call an instant identity change.
Right.
We live in a world of digital speed results. You click a button, a package arrives the next day.
Yep.
You swipe a screen, you have a date for Friday night. You transfer money across the globe in seconds. We have been subtly conditioned to expect our biology to operate at the speed of our technology.
Oh.
But biological systems, both neurologically and psychologically, simply do not work that way. We expect digital speed results from biological systems, and when the biology inevitably takes its time, we assume we are broken or that we failed.
Digital speed versus biological speed. That is such a profound way to look at it. We are judging a slow-growth forest by the standards of a microwave oven.
That's a great way to put it.
And the sources back this up with something called the social investment principle. This principle notes that real personality maturation, actual permanent changes to who you are, happens gradually over years.
Years, not days.
Right. It happens as individuals commit to new social roles, navigate life tasks, and repeatedly engage with their environment. It is a slow, methodical, often messy process that clashes violently with the 30-day transformation marketing myth we are constantly sold on social media.
The social investment principle shows us that identity transformation is an ongoing biological and social evolution. You don't just wake up one day as a completely different person because you read a motivational quote or bought a new planner.
As much as we wish we could.
Right. When your digital expectation of a 30-day total life makeover collides with the reality of decade-long personality maturation, the result is deep frustration, anxiety, and ultimate impatience.
Which brings up a really crucial question. What exactly are the cognitive distortions that actually fuel that impatience? Why do we feel so incredibly stuck when we don't see immediate results?
That's at the core of it.
I love the ice cube analogy from the sources for this. I want to spend some time on this because the physics of it perfectly maps onto our psychology.
Okay.
Imagine you are sitting in a room that is freezing cold. You can see your breath. You are shivering.
Mm-hmm.
The thermometer on the wall reads 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Right in front of you, on a table, is an ice cube. Now, imagine you start to slowly heat the room. It goes up to 26 degrees, 27, 28, 29. You are putting energy and heat into this room.
Yeah.
You are doing the work.
Right.
But looking at the table, absolutely nothing has happened to the ice cube. It's still just sitting there, rock solid. 30 degrees, 31 degrees, still nothing.
It looks like failure.
Exactly. At this point, you might think all that heat, all that effort you just expended is completely wasted. You might want to just turn the heater off and give up.
Yeah.
But then the room hits 32 degrees. The ice cube begins to melt. A phase transition happens. The effort from 25 to 31 degrees wasn't wasted at all. It was stored. It was the necessary prerequisite for the phase transition.
That concept of stored effort is crucial. In the psychology of habit formation, that gap between 25 and 31 degrees, that period where you are putting in the work but seeing zero visible results, is what we call the valley of disappointment.
A valley of disappointment.
This is the psychological space between the linear progress we naturally expect to see and the latent progress that is actually happening beneath the surface. Because we don't see the visible melting of the ice, because we don't see the numbers on the scale drop after 3 days of dieting, we assume nothing is happening. We feel disappointed.
And the valley of disappointment is exactly where the vast majority of people simply throw in the towel. They turn off the heater right at 31 degrees.
Exactly.
It reminds me of the stonecutter metaphor mentioned in the sources. A stonecutter hits a rock 100 times with a heavy hammer, and there isn't even a single microscopic dent in it. But on the 101st strike, the rock completely splits in half.
Right.
Now, everyone watching might celebrate that 101st hit as the big breakthrough. They might call the stonecutter a genius. But the stonecutter knows it was the 100 previous strikes that actually did the work to compromise the structural integrity of the stone.
This phenomenon is known as the plateau of latent potential. We are wired to expect progress to be a straight diagonal line upward. Effort in equals immediate results out.
Right.
But biological and skill-based progress is latent. It builds up invisibly before it crosses a critical threshold. And there are specific cognitive heuristics, mental traps, or biases that distort our perception of this progress and made us incredibly impatient when we were wandering through that valley.
I think identifying these traps is half the battle. If you know what your brain is doing to trick you, you can fight back. What are these specific cognitive biases?
The first major one is hyperbolic discounting,
Hyperbolic discounting.
which is also sometimes referred to as present bias. We have to look at this through the lens of evolutionary biology. To our ancestors wandering the savannah, an immediate reward, like finding a calorie-dense piece of fruit today, was vastly more important for survival than a potentially larger reward a year from now.
Because you might not be alive a year from now.
Exactly. Our brains inherently and drastically discount the value of future rewards. So the instant gratification of a quick fix diet or skipping the gym to watch television is neurologically much more appealing than the slow, compounding results of identity-based habit changes that might take 2 years to fully materialize.
We want the dopamine hit right now, today, not a vague promise of health 60 months in the future. That makes total sense. What's the next trap?
The second is impact bias, or effective forecasting.
Okay.
This is a fascinating area of psychology. Humans are surprisingly, almost comically bad at predicting our future emotional states.
Really?
Oh, terrible at it. We tend to drastically overestimate how much reaching a specific milestone, like hitting a target weight, getting a promotion at work, or buying a new house, will permanently change our baseline happiness.
We think we'll be happy forever.
We think once I get there, once I achieve that outcome, I will be a new, perpetually happy person. But when the milestone is finally reached, the permanent euphoria simply doesn't materialize. We habituate to the new normal very quickly.
We just get used to it.
Right. We feel empty, or we think, is this it? This effective forecasting error heavily contributes to the yo-yo effect we discussed earlier.
You hit the goal, you don't feel magically fixed or transformed into a glowing deity of happiness, so you just revert to your old comfortable self because the new habits aren't anchored to your identity.
Exactly.
Another big one the sources point out is all or nothing thinking.
Yes. All or nothing thinking is a devastating cognitive distortion where a single missed day or a minor setback is viewed as a total catastrophic failure.
Oh, I've done this.
If you are operating on strict outcome-based goals, skipping a single morning workout makes you feel like you've completely derailed the entire project. You think, well, I ruined my streak, the week is ruined, I might as well eat a whole pizza and try again next month.
Right.
This rigidity prevents people from seeing that habit formation is about long-term averages and overall trajectories, not perfect, unbroken streaks.
And finally, there's the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
Let me share a personal story here because I fell into this trap so hard last year.
Let's hear it.
So I decided out of nowhere that I was going to learn to code.
Oh, boy.
I had this massive initial burst of overconfidence. I thought, how hard can this be? I'll build an app in a month. I spent $400 on the perfect ergonomic mechanical keyboard. I bought 3 different online masterclasses. I downloaded all the optimal software. And then I sat down for day 1. When I realized how incredibly dense and difficult the actual syntax was, when I couldn't even get a basic script to run without throwing errors, I quit by day 4. I was completely in the valley of disappointment. I had all the gear and none of the identity.
That is a textbook example of the Dunning-Kruger effect colliding with what we call premature optimization.
Premature optimization.
When that initial unearned optimism hits the brick wall of the valley of disappointment, the contrast is so jarring that people often just walk away. You were trying to optimize the outcome, the perfect keyboard, the best software, before you'd even established the basic core behavior of sitting down to practice coding for 10 minutes a day.
It's a way our brains try to feel like we are making progress without actually doing the difficult neurological work of changing our behavior. Buying the keyboard felt like progress.
It provided the dopamine of action without the friction of learning.
So while all these mental traps are happening in our psychology, what is physically going on inside the skull? Because I know the sources pointed to 2 very specific areas of the brain fighting for control. And here's where it gets really interesting, but I want to make sure we don't get lost in the alphabet soup of neurobiology. How can we understand this internal tug of war?
It is a tug of war, and the neurobiology really demystifies the psychology here. The research, particularly the detailed studies outlined in PMC and Frontiers, shows that our instrumental behavior, our deliberate actions, are controlled by 2 entirely distinct neural systems. For clarity, let's call the first the goal-directed system, and the second the autopilot system.
The goal-directed system versus the autopilot system. I like that. Let's unpack the goal-directed system first. This is where the mental sweat happens, right?
Yes. The goal-directed system is responsible for behaviors that are rapidly acquired, highly purposeful, and incredibly flexible. It uses action-outcome associations.
Action-outcome.
When you are using this system, you are consciously, actively thinking, if I perform this specific action, I will get this specific outcome. This system requires a very high amount of cognitive effort, focused attention, and computational power.
It's heavy lifting for the brain.
Exactly. If we want to be technically precise for a moment, the system resides primarily in the dorsomedial striatum, or DMS, and the prelimbic cortex. But the key takeaway is that this system is effortful.
It's you learning to drive a manual transmission car for the first time. Every single movement is calculated and exhausting.
Yeah.
You're thinking, okay, push the clutch in with my left foot, ease off the gas with my right, shift the stick, slowly release the clutch. You can't even listen to the radio because the cognitive load is so high.
That is a flawless analogy. Now, contrast that with the second system, the autopilot system. This system is responsible for behaviors that are automatic, highly inflexible, and triggered entirely by cues or stimuli in your environment. It uses stimulus-response associations.
So not action outcome. Stimulus response.
Right. It doesn't calculate the outcome at all. It just reacts to the trigger. When I see X, I automatically do Y. Because it completely bypasses the need to evaluate the potential outcome, it is computationally highly efficient.
It's easy.
It requires almost zero mental energy. This system resides in the dorsolateral striatum, or DLS, and the infralimbic cortex.
So the holy grail of habit, building the transition from struggling with a new behavior to it feeling completely effortless, is literally the physical process of your brain shifting control from the high-energy goal-directed system over to the low-energy autopilot system.
That shift is the very core of neuroplasticity in habit formation. And researchers have proven this shift through some incredibly clever experiments with rats, particularly using T mazes and operant conditioning chambers.
The rat mazes. I read this part of the sources a few times because it perfectly illustrates just how stubborn the autopilot system becomes once it's locked in. Can you paint the picture of these lab experiments for us?
Certainly. Scientists train rats to press a lever in a box or run a specific route in a maze to get a food reward. Initially, the rats are relying heavily on their goal-directed system. They learn through trial and error that the specific action of pressing the lever leads to the outcome of getting a sugar pellet.
Right. Action leads to reward.
But scientists need to know exactly when the behavior has transitioned from a conscious choice into a true automatic habit. To test this, they use a fascinating technique called outcome devaluation.
Which basically means they make the reward suddenly undesirable to the rat, right?
Exactly. They might let the rat eat the sugar pellets until it is completely full.
Just gorge on them.
Yeah, what we call sensory-specific satiety. Or, more dramatically, they pair the food reward with a mild toxin, like a lithium chloride injection, which makes the rat feel a little nauseous after eating it.
Oh.
So now, the food outcome has a negative value. It has been completely devalued. The rat no longer wants the food.
So if the rat is still using its goal-directed system, what happens when you put it back in the box?
If the behavior is still governed by the goal-directed system, the rat stops pressing the lever. It's actively calculating action equals food, but food now equals nausea, therefore I will not perform the action. It is flexible, purposeful, and logical.
Makes perfect sense.
However, if the rat has been overtrained, meaning it has pressed that lever thousands of times, and the behavior has fully shifted to the autopilot system, something incredible happens.
What happens?
Even though the food makes them sick, when they are placed in the box, they see the lever, the visual stimulus, and they automatically press it. The conditioned response.
Even though it makes them sick.
They perform the action regardless of the devalued outcome. The stimulus-response association is so deeply wired that it completely overrides the logical action-outcome calculation.
That is wild, but it makes so much sense. The autopilot system literally doesn't care about the result anymore. It just sees the cue and runs the program. That's why I sometimes find myself opening the refrigerator door when I walk into the kitchen, even if I'm completely full. The environment triggered the program.
Yes.
And the sources mention this transition to autopilot happens differently depending on how the rewards are doled out during training. They compared random ratio versus random interval training.
The schedule of reinforcement heavily biases which brain system maintains control. If you use a random ratio schedule where the reward is tied directly to the number of actions performed, like getting a payout every 5th or 10th time the rat presses the lever, it biases the brain to keep using the goal-directed system.
Why is that?
Because there is a strong, predictable correlation between the rate of response and the reward. The rat learns, the faster I work, the faster I get paid.
So it stays actively engaged. But what if you change the timing?
If you use a random interval schedule where the reward comes after a random amount of time has passed, completely regardless of how many times the rat presses the lever in between, it creates massive uncertainty. The brain realizes that calculating the outcome is essentially useless because the timing is out of its control. This uncertainty biases the brain to give up trying to calculate, and it shifts control over to the autopilot system much, much faster.
For unpredictable timing pushes the brain to just throw its hands up and put the physical action on autopilot to save mental energy.
Precisely.
And when that shift to autopilot happens, the brain actually changes the way it physically fires.
Yeah.
I struggled to wrap my head around this next concept at first because it sounds almost like a computer program. But when I read the driving analogy in the source, it clicked. Let's talk about task bracketing.
Task bracketing is perhaps one of the most elegant examples of the brain's drive for efficiency. When you first start learning a routine, say, running a complex key maze for a rat or learning the sequence of making a complex espresso drink for a human barista, The neurons in the goal-directed system, the DMS, are firing constantly at high volume throughout the entire routine.
The brain is actively monitoring every single micro-step. It's burning energy the whole time. It's exhausting.
But as the behavior is repeated over extended training sessions, the activity in the goal-directed areas quiets down, and the autopilot areas in the DLS take over. But the autopilot system doesn't fire continuously.
It doesn't.
No. Instead, as the habit solidifies, the neurons fire heavily at the exact initiation of the routine, and then they fire heavily again at the exact termination of the routine. In the middle of the routine, the neural firing drops almost to baseline.
It brackets the task. It literally chunks the entire complex multi-step sequence of behaviors into one single automatic unit. Start program, run program, end program.
Precisely. The brain has encapsulated the routine. This is an evolutionary masterpiece because it frees up the high-level cognitive resources of the prefrontal cortex to think about other things, while the basal ganglia runs the physical routine on autopilot.
It's exactly like driving a familiar route home from work. You get in your car, you back out of your parking space at the office, and the next thing you know, you're turning the key off in your own driveway.
Yes.
You have absolutely no active memory of the 30 minutes of driving in between. You didn't consciously think about the stoplights, the lane changes, or the turns. You were likely thinking about what to make for dinner, or replaying a stressful conversation you had with your boss.
Your brain was elsewhere.
Your brain task bracketed the drive.
Yeah.
It chunked the entire complex physical act of operating a 2-ton machine at 60 miles an hour into a single automatic unit so your conscious mind could go do something else.
That is the perfect real-world analogy. And understanding that this physical neurological chunking has to take place is vital to understanding why patience is an absolute requirement for habit building. You cannot rush task bracketing.
You can't just wish your brain into task bracketing. It takes physical repetition. And that transitions us perfectly into the neurochemistry powering this whole process. We need to talk about dopamine.
Ah, dopamine.
Everyone throws the word dopamine around as the pleasure chemical. You hear people talk about dopamine detoxes and getting dopamine hits from social media, but the sources show it is so much more sophisticated than just a pleasure drug.
Calling dopamine simply the pleasure chemical is a vast oversimplification that misses its primary evolutionary function. In the context of learning and habit formation, dopamine is primarily a teaching signal.
A teaching signal.
It's a marker of unexpected value. When you are first learning a new behavior, you experience what neuroscientists call a reward prediction error, or RPE.
Let's call RPE the goal seeker to keep it sticky. How does the goal seeker work?
The goal seeker works by comparing expectations to reality. You perform an action, you get a reward, and your brain says, "Oh, wow, that was better than I expected." And a wave of dopamine spikes after you receive the reward.
Okay.
This dopamine release physically strengthens the neural connections in the goal-directed system that led to that reward. It's the brain's way of saying, remember exactly what you just did because we want to do that again.
So initially, the dopamine is the pat on the back after you cross the finish line.
Yes, initially. But as the habit solidifies and begins to transition to the autopilot system, the timing of the dopamine release physically shifts.
It moves.
The dopamine spike stops happening after the reward, and it actually moves backward in time to occur during the cue before you even take the action.
Oh, wow. So if my habit is going for a run every morning, eventually my brain stops giving me dopamine after I finish the sweaty run and starts giving it to me the second my alarm goes off and I see my running shoes next to the bed.
That is exactly what happens. And that anticipatory spike of dopamine is what provides the craving, the raw motivational drive to actually execute the habit loop. The cue itself becomes the reward signal. You are driven to run not by the outcome, but by the trigger.
And the research has uncovered an even deeper layer to this, which I think is one of the most important takeaways from our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We talked about RPE, the goal seeker, but there's a recent breakthrough discovery regarding a second dopamine system, APE, or action prediction error.
This is a monumental discovery in modern neuroscience. We now understand there are two entirely separate dopamine-based learning systems operating in tandem.
Okay, two systems.
The goal seeker RPE is encoded largely in the ventral striatum, and it evaluates outcomes. It helps you figure out if a goal is valuable. But APE, action prediction error, what we might call the repetition engine, is encoded in a completely different area of the brain, specifically the tail of the striatum.
The repetition engine, I love that. What makes the repetition engine so different from the goal seeker?
The repetition engine doesn't care about the value of the outcome at all. It doesn't care if the goal is good or bad for you. Its sole job is to reinforce actions that are repeated frequently. It tracks the frequency of a behavior, not the quality of the reward.
Let me make sure I have this right because this is huge.
hmm
The goal seeker helps you pick a good goal early on. But the repetition engine is the system that actually locks in the habit long term, completely regardless of the goal's value.
That is correct. The repetition engine is what allows a behavior to eventually bypass the value-based, goal-directed system entirely and become a stored automatic policy. It reinforces the physical action simply because it has been repeated.
Which explains so much.
This is why you can have a habit that you know is bad for you, like smoking or biting your nails, but you do it anyway. The repetition engine has locked the policy in, regardless of the negative outcome.
This raises an important question. If the brain physically has to shift from relying on the goal seeker networks to building and relying on the repetition engine networks in the tail of the striatum, how could we possibly expect an instant identity change in 30 days?
We can't. It is neurologically impossible. You are asking your brain to physically restructure corticostriatal connections. If we want to demystify the jargon, this involves complex processes like glutamatergic transmission.
Okay, stop right there. Glutamatergic transmission sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. Can we ELI-5 that? Explain it like I'm 5.
Let's use an analogy. Think of your brain's neural pathways like roads in a forest. When you start a new habit, you are bushwhacking a new trail through the underbrush. It's slow, difficult, and the trail easily overgrows if you stop walking it. Glutamatergic transmission is essentially the brain's construction crew coming in to upgrade that trail. Every time you repeat the behavior, the crew pours literal concrete over the dirt path. With enough repetition, they turn it into a paved, multi-lane highway where signals can travel effortlessly. But pouring concrete and waiting for it to set takes physical time. You cannot rush the construction crew.
That is incredibly helpful. Pouring concrete takes time. So how much time are we actually talking about here? I know the cultural myth is that it takes 21 days to build a habit, but what does the actual science say about how long the construction crew needs?
The famous University College London study led by Philippa Lally addressed this exact question. They found that the 21-day rule is a complete myth.
The myth?
On average, it takes 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic. Now, that is just an average. The timeline can range anywhere from 18 days for a very simple habit, like drinking a glass of water after breakfast, to over 250 days for highly complex habits. But 66 days is a much more realistic baseline. It takes roughly 2 months of consistent daily votes to physically pour enough concrete to rewire the basal ganglia.
But the brain isn't totally rigid, right? Even if I build a strong habit highway on the autopilot system, I'm not a robot forever. If I want to stop driving on that highway, I can.
No, you aren't a robot.
Yeah.
The healthy brain maintains a delicate, dynamic balance between the goal-directed system and the autopilot system. Habit behavior is not completely inflexible under normal conditions.
Okay.
Normally, if an outcome becomes highly aversive, say, your favorite coffee shop on your drive to work changes ownership and starts serving terrible, bitter coffee. Your goal-directed system can temporarily take back control from the autopilot system. It steps in and says, wait, the outcome here is no longer valuable. Let's stop this automatic routine and find a new coffee shop.
It's like a manual override switch on the autopilot.
Yes. However, and this is a critical point, there are conditions where this flexibility completely breaks down. The research shows that in cases of chronic elevated stress or prolonged exposure to drugs of abuse, the autopilot system can become maladaptively dominant.
Maladaptively dominant.
This is the neurological transition from a benign habit to a compulsion or a clinical addiction. The autopilot pathways become so deeply ingrained, and the prefrontal control, the manual override switch, becomes so weakened that the individual continues the behavior despite clear, devastating negative consequences. The manual override switch literally gets jammed.
That perfectly explains why stress makes us fall back into our absolute worst habits. When we are stressed about a deadline at work, our cognitive resources are depleted, the prefrontal cortex essentially goes offline to save energy, and the brain just defaults to the computationally cheap automatic routines stored in the autopilot system, whether those routines are healthy for us or not.
Exactly.
We reach for the junk food or the alcohol because the paved highway is already there.
Under stress, your brain prioritizes metabolic efficiency. It relies on the programs that require the least amount of mental energy to execute.
So we've explored the depth of the valley of disappointment. We've talked about the goal seeker versus the repetition engine and pouring concrete over neural pathways. But what does this all mean for you listening right now?
The practical application.
Exactly. How do you actually apply this dense science to your daily life to build habits that actually stick? How do you move from outcome-based frustration to identity-based success?
The sources provide a very clear, highly practical blueprint for exactly this, synthesizing the psychology and the neuroscience into actionable steps. We can break it down into 5 key steps for building identity-based habits, and it is crucial that these steps are followed in order.
Let's dive deep into this. Step 1. Decide who you want to be. This is the absolute foundation. As we discussed, you cannot start with the outcome. You don't start by saying, I want to lose 20 pounds or I want to run a marathon. You pick the habit you want to implement, and then you ask yourself a very specific question. What kind of person does this naturally?
It's about defining the identity first. The identity anchors the behavior. If you want to lose weight, the identity you are adopting is I am an athlete or I am a healthy person.
Wait.
If you want to read more books, the identity is I am a reader. If you want to stop yelling at your kids, the identity is I am a patient parent. This frames the behavior not as a chore you have to endure to reach a distant finish line, but as a daily expression of your core self. You act in alignment with who you believe you are.
Step 2. Start with the smallest possible action. You have to bypass the brain's natural resistance and its tendency to rely on the high-energy goal-directed system. This is where James Clear's famous 2-minute rule comes into play. You scale the desired habit down until it takes almost zero effort to complete.
Because the goal in the very beginning isn't the outcome. The goal is simply establishing the neural pathway. You are just trying to get the construction crew to pour the first layer of dirt.
Make it easy.
If your identity is I am a reader, you don't commit to reading a chapter a day. That requires too much effort. You commit to reading one single page. If you want to be a runner, your habit isn't running 3 miles. Your habit is simply putting on your running shoes and tying the laces. You're making the action so computationally cheap that your brain has no valid reason to resist it. You're greasing the groove.
Step 3. Every action is a vote. I love this concept. Every single time you perform that habit, no matter how small or insignificant it feels, you are casting a vote for your new identity. You're providing evidence to yourself that you are this new person.
And this framework is crucial for combating that all-or-nothing thinking we discussed earlier. Think about a political election. You don't need a unanimous 100% verdict to win the election. You just need a majority of the votes. When you are building a new identity, you are just trying to accumulate a majority of behavioral votes over time.
So if your identity is I am a runner, and you miss a Tuesday morning run because it's pouring rain, you have a cold, and you're exhausted, it doesn't destroy your identity.
No.
A runner's identity isn't shattered by one missed day. It's absorbed by it. You just cast a vote for runner on Wednesday. You still hold the majority.
This concept aligns perfectly with the hard neuroscience. The UCL study on the 66-day habit formation process specifically tracked missed days. They found that missing a single day did not significantly affect the overall habit formation process.
That's a relief.
The brain's neuroplasticity isn't ruined by one missed repetition. It is looking for the overarching pattern of consistency. It's looking for the trend line, not the individual data points.
Step 4. Habit tracking as evidence collection. Tracking your habits on a calendar or an app isn't just about making sure you did it or holding yourself accountable to some punishing schedule. It serves a much deeper psychological purpose. It builds self-efficacy.
It creates a visual ledger of the self.
Yeah.
Because identity is essentially a belief system about who you are, it requires evidence to sustain itself. You can't just stand in front of a mirror and wish yourself into believing you are a disciplined writer. You need proof.
Physical proof.
Every check mark on a calendar, every filled-in box on a habit tracker is physical, objective proof that you are actively becoming that person. When you inevitably doubt yourself while wandering through the valley of disappointment, you can look at the ledger. Ledger doesn't lie. It proves you are doing the work.
Step 5. Habit stacking and the paperclip strategy. I really want to spend some time here because habit stacking is where the magic really happens in daily life. Habit stacking is brilliant because it uses the automaticity your brain already possesses. You anchor the new, fragile micro-habit to an existing, deeply hardwired routine.
Right.
For example, after I pour my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate for 1 minute. Your brain already knows exactly how to pour the coffee on autopilot via the autopilot system. You are just attaching a new train car to the back of an engine that is already moving.
It leverages the established neural highway, But we also need to discuss troubleshooting because habit stacks can fail if they aren't designed correctly.
Yes. What happens when a habit stack falls apart? Let's say my stack is, after I brush my teeth at night, I will read one page of a book.
Yeah.
But half the time I forget to read the book. What went wrong?
Usually a failed stack lacks a specific, unmistakable cue. After I brush my teeth might be too vague. Are you still in the bathroom? Are you walking to the bedroom?
I see.
A better stack would be, after I put my toothbrush back in the holder, I will immediately pick up the book sitting on my nightstand. The cue must be hyper-specific. Additionally, you have to ensure the existing habit is actually a habit. You can't stack a new behavior on top of a routine you only do 3 days a week. The anchor must be rock solid.
And what about the paperclip strategy mentioned in the productivity sources?
The paperclip strategy is a wonderful tactile way to focus entirely on the process. A famous sales broker used this. He would start every day with 2 jars on his desk. One jar had 120 paper clips. The other was empty. After every sales call he made, he moved 1 paper clip to the empty jar.
Just a simple physical action.
He didn't focus on the outcome, the sales he made, or the money he earned. He focused entirely on moving the paper clips. It's about breaking tasks down into visual, bite-sized chunks to ensure you are rewarding the action itself. It feeds the repetition engine rather than relying on the goal seeker.
So essentially, when we put all this together, we need to completely redefine what high performance actually looks like in our modern world. We need to challenge you, the listener, to actively reject the robotic consistency that hustle culture relentlessly demands.
Strongly agree.
Having human fluctuations in energy, having days where your motivation is absolutely zero or missing a day here and there that is completely normal, it is biological reality. And as the data clearly shows, it does not derail long-term neuroplasticity. You are not a robot. And trying to act like one only leads to profound burnout and the inevitable abandonment of your goals.
When we synthesize all of the psychology, the neurobiology, and the practical frameworks we've discussed today, the core message is this. True patience isn't just a moral virtue, it is a strict biological requirement.
A biological requirement.
By consciously shifting your focus from chasing outcomes to building an identity, you are fundamentally aligning your psychology with your neurobiology. You are giving your brain the actual physical time it requires to transfer control from the high-effort, goal-directed system over to the automatic, computationally efficient system. You are allowing the repetition engine to do its work of pouring the concrete.
You are no longer just trying to change or gritting your teeth through another miserable diet. You're actively collecting votes for who you are becoming, one small, heavily bracketed task at a time.
And if we step back and look at the broader philosophical implications of this science, it fundamentally changes how we view ourselves as human beings. We so often think of our personalities and our identities as these fixed, rigid structures we are born with.
Right.
We say, I'm just not a morning person, or I'm just not naturally athletic, as if these are immutable laws of physics. But the neuroscience and the behavioral psychology we've explored today suggest something entirely different. Our brains are relentlessly plastic.
And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Something to really chew on after you finish listening to this deep dive. What if your current personality, with all its perceived flaws, limitations, and strengths, isn't actually a fixed, static thing you were born with?
It's an interesting thought.
What if you are simply the accumulated momentum of thousands upon thousands of behavioral votes you have cast over your lifetime? If identity is just a habit of being a physical network of neural connections that was built over time and can absolutely be rewired, then you have ultimate agency over who you become. You are the architect of the neural pathways. So the question I want to leave you with is this. What single tiny vote will you cast for a brand new identity today?
It is a powerful question to ask yourself, and as the science clearly shows, every single vote truly counts.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep learning, keep casting those votes, be patient with your biology, and we will catch you on the next deep dive. Take care.